So hi everyone, thanks so much. As I had mentioned, for those who are just tuning in, my name is Jessica, and I am a master's in interdisciplinary studies candidate at UNB. After 4 long years at UNB, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to present the findings of the research on this research was supported by Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and conducted as a part of the Growing a Better Future initiative of Raven. And so minutes, I hope to keep it brief enough so that we can have time to have a larger discussion at the end with lots of questions. So the problem I'm going to introduce is multifaceted and includes challenges in agriculture. So first, many of us know that accessing local food can sometimes be a challenge, either because of cost and or accessibility. The number of farms in New Brunswick is declining, and we rely heavily on food imports from other provinces and countries. COVID-19 has exposed our lack of self-sufficiency and reliance on exports, as we witness some grocery stores struggle to keep their produce shelves stocked. Second, a third of food occurs during agricultural production in North America, and 13% of fruits and vegetables are never harvested. This has led to billions of dollars in lost revenues for farmers, increases in CO2 production. Banks. So food banks first appeared in 1981 as a response to people's increasing need for food assistance following consumer price increases and the recession. Though today they're a crucial and 61 in New Brunswick. And although the number has flatlined in Canada, we have continued to see a rise, slight rise in clients in New Brunswick this past year. So Brunswick, around 15% of households are experiencing food insecurity, and the greatest cause for this is low income. So the cost of fruits and vegetables is increasing, making fresh local food even more inaccessible for those with limited incomes. So coordinated food security impact, and these are beginning to take root at the federal level, which is great. In 2013, there were 64 food policy initiatives across Canada, and 2017, the beginnings of consultations for an integrated network. So fresh food tax credits, what are they? FFTCs for short were introduced by governments in 4 Canadian provinces beginning in 2013. These are British Columbia, Quebec, to strengthen the local agricultural sectors while supplying fresh, nutritious food to Canada's food banks, all while reducing food waste. However, very minimal. Each province's policy is enacted under a different name, but the umbrella term coined by Food Banks Canada, FFTC's Fresh Food Tax Credits, is the one I'll use consistently throughout this presentation to just keep it simple.
So, through these policies, agricultural producers can claim non-refundable tax credits of 25% or 38.6% in the case of Quebec. So on paper, it's actually 50% for Quebec, but their tax program runs a bit differently, so it ends up being 38.6 at the end when all is said and done. And it's of the fair market value on specific food items donated to food banks or other registered charities. So there's notable differences between provinces for which producers can claim the fresh food tax credit. For instance, Quebec has expanded their eligibility of who can redeem the FFTC to include food processors and also processed foods. Another distinction is that Quebec and Nova Scotia food donations must be given to a food bank, whereas producers in Ontario and BC can give to any charitable organization that distributes free food. So that could even include a school breakfast program. So how this research came about was in January, Raven coordinated a meeting at the Fredericton Food Bank, or the Greener Village, as some of us may know it. And one of the food bank directors raised this idea for a fresh food tax credit exploration in New Brunswick. After diving in, though, I quickly discovered that there was minimal research available to evaluate their effectiveness across Canada. And there's only been 3 studies conducted as of today. What we have learned from those 3 studies is that the volume of food donated was less than 0.03% of the total food loss and waste in Canada, and less than 1% of eligible producers utilized the fresh food tax credit program. Nevertheless, I still went ahead for the research on this topic, given the potential impact that fresh food tax credits could have if barriers to the utilization were addressed before the onset of such a policy. So therefore, the purpose of this research is really to better understand New Brunswick's producers' awareness and interest in a fresh food tax credit, and also the ability of New Brunswick food banks to receive more fresh local fruits and veggies. So the research questions for this were, are agricultural producers aware of FFTCs in other provinces? And what do they anticipate would be the credit value, whereby they'd be incentivized to donate and contribute to the reduction of food waste? And if FFTC were implemented in New Brunswick, would food banks' culture, practices, and capacity be favorable to handling more fresh local fruits and vegetables? So I chose to focus my research on the Nashwauk River Valley region to go deep rather than wide. I interviewed 1 staff and 1 volunteer from both the Stanley Food Bank and the Fredericton Food Bank, and 3 agricultural producers who had donated to these food banks in the past. And these were identified by the food bank informants who I had interviewed. And 2 of these producers were operators of a for-profit farm, and 1 was an operator of a not-for-profit farm. All were organic, and all were producing on 1 to 6 acres of land. So the interviews were audio recorded, transcribed, and analyzed through themes found in past studies. Some of these themes were ready buyers for producers, cost, waste, and their intentions to donate. And for food banks, as I had mentioned, the research question, really looking at capacity, practices, and culture. So now for the fun part, the results. So what I found, beginning with producers, was that all 3 agricultural producers have just enough supply to meet their demand and have waiting lists for their community shared agricultural boxes, or have them completely sold in advance of their growing season. So therefore, there seems to be no shortage of people who are interested in purchasing their products for what they're currently growing. While the food banks perceive local food to be more expensive, all 3 agricultural producers stated their prices were on par or comparable with grocery store pricing. And producers said they felt fairly compensated for their products, but interestingly, is a lot of their time was not accounted for in their expenses. So therefore, so some of them weren't taking a salary, for instance. So these producers' food prices, whether perceived as affordable or expensive, is not really an accurate representation of the true cost to produce these local fruits and vegetables. And this tells us that the level of incentive that producers feel they would need to make donating a higher priority is likely even lower than the true cost that it actually takes to produce that food when their time and talents are accounted for. All 3 agricultural producers have a crop plan, which is a detailed timeline of which products will be harvested each week, and therefore all reported having minimal waste. 1 producer stated, "My goal is not to grow things that I can't sell. After 10 years or so, I feel like I've messed up if I have too much of something." The actual volume of food that's left behind on their farms is difficult to measure, since a shared understanding of food loss and waste is lacking. Imperfect produce with blemishes or seconds are seen as good compost that help provide nutrients to the soil. 1 producer commented on this by saying, "I don't consider that waste. You know, there's always going to be some unmarketable part of your crop." When there are edible fruits and vegetables already harvested but left unsold through regular channels such as the farmer's market, producers are still reluctant to make a donation because they fear the food will be wasted at the food bank. Producers explain that they have offered perfectly good produce in the past to their paying clients for free, such as kohlrabi or turnip, Swiss chard, but the clients have rejected them even there because they don't know how to cook with them, or they don't like those certain food items because they're not used to eating them. All agricultural producers interviewed for this research had made a donation to a food bank in the past, but none were donating currently to a food bank. Only one agricultural producer was making semi-regular donations at the time of my interviews to locations that they had a personal connection with that weren't a food bank. So fresh local food donations to food banks seem to be more one-off occurrences, and food banks really couldn't depend on them to supply consistent fruits and vegetables to their clients. The shared priority between all agricultural producers was not to make more donations, though, at the end of the day, but it's to keep their farms running. One farmer stated, "Farmers are going out of business all the time because they can't make a living and are being asked to take on the burden of providing food to low income. We're income insecure ourselves." Oof. So all of the farms included in the study were smaller in size, so they did not feel as though they had an adequate volume of food to make a worthwhile donation and found it inconvenient to take a few leftover things. None of them had access to refrigerated vehicles to properly transport fresh local fruits and vegetables and had just enough staff to complete their sales generating tasks. So it could be worth exploring with larger farms if they have greater access to infrastructure and more human resources, they could be in a better position to donate. Nevertheless, agricultural producers' ability to donate more fresh local fruits and vegetables hinges at the end of the day on food banks' ability to receive more perishable items. So now we'll look at food banks' capacity. Both food banks reported that they have plenty of room for non-perishable items and adequate frozen storage, but both mentioned the need for more cold storage space. So the greatest barrier for them was physical infrastructure and equipment. The urban food bank mentioned that once their freezer equipment is moved outside, they would have room to be able to process fresh fruits and vegetables in their teaching kitchen. This solution could also work at the rural food bank since they too have a kitchen in their facility, and as one respondent said, an unlimited capacity for frozen food. The rural food bank also mentioned that they have capacity to store more shelf-stable produce, such as root vegetables, that would not require refrigeration and could be offered year-round. For food bank culture, the most prevalent factor was staff attitudes and perceptions. Interestingly, and this was the one surprise from my research, staff believe that food bank clients would rather have non-perishable items over fresh local food if given the option. As one food bank respondent said, "How do you get people to take fresh food over the craft dinner? Most of our clients aren't concerned with local food as much as feeding their families, and to an extent, so are we as an organization." This comment demonstrates food bank staff are more preoccupied with ensuring that people have enough to eat over the quality of what they're eating. Despite the claims, though, that food bank clients aren't interested in local food, the rural food bank respondent did add that clients have asked for potatoes almost constantly, but they're too expensive or difficult to source. Interestingly, both one respondent from the rural and urban food banks spoke about the high cost of food. They compared a bag of potatoes to a box of craft dinner. And I find this problematic since while a 5-pound bag of potatoes is more expensive than a box of craft dinner, sure, the bag of potatoes could contribute to more meals, nutrition, and calories. But as the food bank respondents have said, there are barriers to procurement that make this challenging other than just the cost for them. So it's therefore no surprise that as far as practices go, procurement was the most frequently mentioned barrier under this theme. So both food banks do accept perishable and non-perishable food items from retailers, wholesalers, pharmacies, the National Food Sharing Program, and local food producers whenever possible. Neither have a portion of their operating budget, though, to go towards local food. They do have an operating budget to purchase food, and the urban food bank has a portion dedicated specifically for fresh that they have received through a special grant. Both desire to procure more fresh, but all informants said that the cost to purchase these items, whether local or even non-local from a mass retailer, were just simply too expensive. So the urban food bank volunteer, one of them had said, We have to get it fresh, but at a price we can afford. So FFTCs, fresh food tax credits, if available in the province, could help facilitate more fresh food donations by farmers. And I wanted to explore this more to see if this could be a way to help that affordability piece. So I asked the 7 people, the 4 food banks and 3 producers, what they thought about the fresh food tax credit. And here is what I found. So first, food bank respondents felt that an FFTC would create more work for farmers, but it would have a significant impact on the volume of fresh local food donations they receive. However, there seems to be a disconnect between how much fresh local food they think is wasted compared to how much or how little food producers reported to me that is actually wasted. Second, agricultural producers agreed that a fresh food tax credit would create more work, but were interested in the possibility of increased profit. For smaller producers, the incentive, though, of an FFTC might not really be an incentive at all, where only 1 in 3 producers had a net profit that the FFTC could be claimed against. This one producer with the profit said that a tax credit set at 40%, he would likely break even, but with a credit at 50%, he may be inclined to plant a little more. While others did not have a profit, they agreed that a fresh food tax credit set at a 50% level would increase their incentive to donate and would, in theory, cover their costs. Even though producers and food banks thought favorably towards FFTCs, all of them, though, did mention that food security will not be achieved by adding this policy. As one producer mentioned, solving the income piece upstream would have a greater impact than giving food producers a tax break. And this brings us to the discussion. So through this research, I learned that fresh food tax credits are, in fact, insufficient to solve the complexity of the food insecurity problem. Rather, it is the product of other policy issues, such as the lack of affordable housing, inflation, no basic income guarantee, that need to be addressed so that people have the means, the income, the money to purchase food. It's important to reiterate that food banks were never designed to be a permanent solution to people's dietary needs and were only intended to be a supplement. Nevertheless, as long as they're a part of, as long as some of our social assistance rates are among the lowest in the country here in New Brunswick, people will continue to turn to help from food banks. So there's an opportunity for them to utilize the resources they do have and work with others to really improve the health and well-being of their clients by distributing more fresh foods that align with Canada's Food Guide whenever possible. Third, food bank staff and volunteers mentioned that their clients aren't asking for fresh local, but this could be due to the perpetual lack of access to these foods or also poor housing conditions that don't have adequate storage, refrigeration, or cooking space to prepare them. It would be very valuable to know how many food bank clients actually want fresh fruits and vegetables, and if so, what form do they want them? Do they want them fresh, frozen, canned? Does it matter? Do they care if they are local or not? Local is an important value to me, and I think post-COVID people are talking about local, but if it's true, as the food bank volunteer said, that people are more concerned about feeding their families, then that's something to investigate a bit further. As of now, we can only compare the food bank respondents' feedback to other studies that have shown us that more than 80% of clients will take fruits and vegetables when they're given the option. Now, fourth, there's been a limited amount of research to compare the cost of local and non-local produce, although there was one comparison in the US that found that more than half of produce sourced from farmers markets were a little bit more expensive than the same items sourced from a grocery store. So one idea I had was to secure better pricing. We could have stronger partnerships between food bank staff and agricultural producers, but also food banks between food banks to have greater purchasing power. Kraft dinner costs $1.13 a box for the food bank or also the client who's shopping at the grocery store. But a bag of carrots purchased by a food bank client going to the grocery store is a significantly different price than what the food banks could get wholesale by collectively making a purchase together. So that could be one way to increase its affordability, to be able to deliver more of those fresh items to clients. All food bank staff and volunteers reported that they felt extremely supported by their community donors, but they didn't feel comfortable asking them to donate more fresh fruits and vegetables. One idea is food banks could work with producers in advance to have them grow certain items, and this could help them know when they would need to mobilize staff and volunteers around harvest timelines so that they could process these foods to increase their shelf life. The other idea, building off the last point about buying in bulk, would be to plan with farmers in growing storage crops like carrots, potatoes, apples that could be more consistently offered year-round. And then finally, the rural and urban food banks did not have any significant capacity differences, except that the rural community had even greater challenges accessing transportation to obtain local fresh food, and they also don't have a grocery store in their community. The Food Depot Alimentaire, FDA for short, could be something to explore that could solve this challenge. The FDA is a central storage and distribution hub in Moncton that many of you know about, supplying 61 food banks, or the majority of the food banks across the province. And the FDA is already traveling past rural farms to these food banks on a monthly basis. So there's definitely potential for them to pick up, handle, store, and distribute more of these fresh fruits and vegetables. And of course, there's a cost associated to all of this. So who pays for this? I'm not sure, and I'm not here to answer that question. And there may even be a potential, I don't know where FDA is at capacity-wise. They were not a part of my research. But I was thinking, if they are traveling a certain distribution route, to even map where are those refrigerators, cold storage spaces. Maybe it's even at a farm, they have extra cold storage space, to be able to utilize those existing infrastructure pieces and connect the dots a bit better. So some recommendations and future research. So to remove the barriers for producers and food banks, to improve the nutritional quality of fresh local food and reduce food waste. First, we could complete client surveys at food banks to determine which fresh local fruits and vegetables are most desired. If people don't want the Swiss chard, kohlrabi, what do they want? What can we be growing and receiving a tax credit on, or purchasing with a portion of the food budget? Second would be to map the distribution and storage infrastructure across the province, just as I mentioned, to identify what's available. Third, we really need a connector to connect the food banks and the producers and even the wholesalers, so people who have food to give know that there's somewhere they can give it, and people that have a need for food know where they can reach out to and get that food. This person could be a government representative or a leader of a not-for-profit community organization. Further research is also warranted on all of these recommendations to see if they actually impact the ability of food banks to handle more fresh local. If there are future studies on fresh food tax credits, a comparison of other New Brunswick food banks should be included as well to have a broader scope. And also local food vendors that aren't producers, such as wholesalers or retailers, and agricultural producers above 6 acres and of all farm types, organic and non-organic. Nevertheless, what we can conclude from this study, which is just a tidbit, a drop in the bucket to this greater problem, but that there is an interest in a fresh food tax credit in the Nashwauk River Valley region at the 50% level. This builds on existing evidence, though, that fresh food tax credits will not meet the objectives to strengthen local agricultural sector, provide more nutritious food to Canada's food banks, and reduce food waste on their own, because we need the culture, practices, and capacity of food banks to catch up in order to receive, store, and distribute more of these fresh fruits and vegetables to their clients. So from the results, the three barriers that I really identified were physical infrastructure and equipment, staff attitudes and perceptions, and capacity. So if these are addressed, then this tax credit does have the potential to increase the quantity of fresh local food across food banks in the Nashwauk River Valley region. So that is a lot of talking, and I thank you for listening, and I thank you for your patience with the technology challenges. I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Susan O'Donnell for her supervision and leadership on this project. And I am moving on from University of New Brunswick as of midnight tonight when I'm done my edits, but I am so committed to staying connected to this community of champions who are working on broader food security issues in our region. And I just want to thank you all for your passion for the cause. And it's been so encouraging in the last 4 years to just, I see the needle moving. And of course, we want to wake up one day and, it all be solved. But the needle is moving. And I just feel so encouraged by who's on this call today and the work that you're all doing in this room. So thank you for listening. And I'd now like to open up the floor to questions.
That's wonderful, Jess. Thank you. I'm just going to stop the recording now.